You ever been in a situation where split-second decisions change everything? I mean everything. Your whole damn life flipped upside down like a rig jackknifing on black ice. Well, buckle up, friend, 'cause what I'm about to tell you happened back in '89, and it still gives me the shivers every time I think about it. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time when everything changed in an instant. I read every single one. Name's Frank Kowalski. Been hauling freight for 42 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. Hell, I started driving when CB radios were the only way to talk to another soul out there on the lonesome highway. Back then, we had a brotherhood on the road. Real truckers who'd give you the shirt off their back if you were broken down in the middle of nowhere. By '89, I was what you'd call a road veteran. Silver beard that my late wife Martha used to say made me look distinguished. Weathered hands that could feel every vibration through the steering wheel, and a gut that had seen too many truck stop diners serving coffee strong enough to wake the dead. That October morning started like any other Tuesday. I was deadheading back from Phoenix, empty trailer rattling behind my '85 Peterbilt 359. She was painted deep blue with chrome stacks that caught the morning sun like mirrors. The desert was just starting to cool down from the brutal summer heat, and the morning air had that crisp bite that reminded you winter was coming fast to the high country. I'd loaded up on black coffee at the Flying J in Phoenix, grabbed a couple of those gas station burritos that could probably survive a nuclear war, and hit the road before dawn. I'd been running this route for decades, knew every curve, every grade, every spot where the Smokey Bears like to hide with their radar guns, waiting to write tickets. Route 66 through Arizona. She's a beautiful mistress, but she'll kill you if you don't respect her. Those mountain descents coming down from the Mogollon Rim. They've claimed more trucks than I care to count. I'd seen plenty of good drivers get cocky on that stretch, thinking they could ride their brakes all the way down. Most of them learned the hard way that gravity don't give second chances, but that morning felt different somehow. You know how sometimes you get that feeling in your gut, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, even when the sky's clear blue? Old-timers like me, we learned to listen to those feelings. They've kept me alive through ice storms in Wyoming, where you couldn't see 10 feet ahead, dust devils in New Mexico that could flip a trailer, and fog so thick in California that you had to follow the taillights of the rig ahead and pray he knew where he was going. I was about 15 miles out of Flagstaff, coming down a particularly steep grade, must have been a 6% decline that stretched for nearly 3 miles, when I first noticed something wasn't right. The air brakes felt spongy. Not completely gone, mind you, but not the solid, reliable bite I was used to after 4 decades of driving. It was like stepping on a wet sponge instead of a firm pedal. Now, any driver worth his salt knows that when you're hauling 40 tons down a mountain grade and your brakes start acting up, you pull over immediately. No load is worth dying for, and an empty trailer can be just as dangerous as a loaded one when you're picking up speed on a downhill run. But here's the thing, there wasn't anywhere to pull over. The shoulder was barely wide enough for a pickup truck, and the guardrail was the only thing between me and a 1,000-foot drop into Walnut Canyon, where the ancient cliff dwellings looked like tiny dollhouses from up here. I started pumping the brakes, trying to build up air pressure in the system, but with each pump, I could feel them getting softer, mushier. The Jake brake was working, engine compression slowing me down some, but not nearly enough for what was coming ahead. My speedometer was climbing, 45, 50, 55 feet muffishi, and I could hear the trailer starting to push the tractor, that subtle shift in the rig's behavior that every trucker dreads. That's when I saw her. A woman, maybe in her 30s, standing right there on the shoulder about a quarter-mile ahead. But she wasn't just standing there. She was looking right at me, and even from that distance, I could see something was terribly wrong. At first, I thought maybe I was seeing things. You spend enough hours staring at asphalt, and your mind starts playing tricks on you. Mirages, shadows that look like people, all kinds of highway ghosts that dance in your peripheral vision when you've been driving too long. Hell, I once saw what I swore was a buffalo standing in the middle of I-40 near Gallup, only to realize it was a tumbleweed the size of a Volkswagen. But as I got closer, pumping those failing brakes and downshifting like my life depended on it, I could see clear as day that this was real. A woman with long auburn hair catching the morning sunlight, wearing a faded denim jacket that had seen better days and jeans that were torn at the knees, standing there like she was waiting for a city bus in downtown Phoenix instead of on a mountain highway where nobody had any business being on foot. My first instinct was to lay on the horn, give her a good blast from the air horns to get her attention and make her move. But something stopped me cold. Maybe it was the way she was standing there, so still, so deliberate, like a statue carved from determination itself. Or maybe it was the look on her face when she turned toward my approaching rig. Even through the windshield, even with the distance closing fast between us, I could see her eyes. They weren't the eyes of someone who was lost or confused or stranded with car trouble. They were the eyes of someone who had made a decision, a final decision, and was seeing it through no matter what. "What the hell are you doing, lady?" I muttered under my breath, downshifting again, and feeling the engine brake strain against the weight of 40 tons of steel and momentum. The speedometer was still climbing despite my efforts, 58, 60 MEPA and climbing. At this rate, even if my brakes came back full strength right now, I'd need a football field to stop this rig. And this woman, she wasn't moving. If anything, she seemed to be stepping closer to the white line, closer to the path of my truck. I should have just focused on my own problems. Should have been scanning the roadside for a runaway truck ramp. Should have been reaching for the CB radio to call for help on Channel 19. Should have been doing anything except worrying about some stranger who clearly had her own agenda. That's what the old Frank would have done, the Frank who'd learned over 4 decades of highway living that you can't save everybody, that sometimes people make choices and you just have to live with the consequences and keep on trucking. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't random. Nothing about this felt random. The brake failure happening right here, her being in this exact spot, the timing of it all coming together like pieces of a puzzle I didn't understand yet. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, and I was powerless to stop the chain reaction that was about to unfold on this stretch of Arizona asphalt. That's when I heard Martha's voice in my head, clear as if she was sitting right there in the passenger seat like she used to on those long hauls when we were young and broke and thought we could conquer the world together with nothing but love and a beat-up Kenworth. "Frank," she'd always say in that gentle but firm way of hers, "sometimes the road puts people in your path for a reason. Don't be so quick to drive around them. Sometimes the detour is exactly where you're supposed to be." Martha had been gone 3 years by then, cancer taking her just like it had taken my daddy and his daddy before him, leaving me alone with nothing but memories and the endless highway stretching out ahead. But her voice still came to me in moments like these, when the world seemed to be spinning out of control, and I needed an anchor to keep me from drifting into the darkness. She'd been my co-pilot for 38 years, the one who kept me grounded when the road tried to swallow me whole, who made truck stop coffee taste like home and turned the cab of our rig into a sanctuary. "You see that woman up ahead?" I could almost hear her saying, her voice mixing with the rumble of the diesel engine and the whistle of wind through the slightly open window. "She's not there by accident, Frank. Nothing on this highway is ever by accident. Every mile, every moment, every person, it's all connected somehow." Martha always believed in signs, in fate, in the idea that the universe had a plan even when it looked like pure chaos. I used to tease her about it, call her my little fortune teller when she'd get those feelings about which routes to take or which truck stops to avoid, because something just didn't feel right. But damn if she wasn't right more often than not. Like the time she insisted we take the long way around Denver, because she had a bad feeling about I-70, even though it would cost us an extra day and the dispatcher was breathing down our necks. Found out later there'd been a massive pile-up in a blizzard that would have put us right in the middle of twisted metal and tragedy. The speedometer hit 62 MEPA, and I could see the woman more clearly now. She was young, maybe 32, with that kind of beauty that comes from hard living. Sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, eyes that had seen too much pain for someone her age, but still holding on to something that looked like hope, or maybe desperation. She was holding something in her hand, something small and dark that I couldn't make out from this distance, clutching it like it was the most important thing in the world. "What are you trying to tell me, Martha?" I whispered, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white as the painted lines on the highway. "What am I supposed to do here? How do I save her when I can't even save myself?" The answer came not in words, but in a memory that hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Martha, sitting in our kitchen back in Tucson, reading a letter that had made her cry. Real tears, not the kind you get from chopping onions or watching a sad movie. "Sometimes," she'd said, folding the letter carefully like it was made of butterfly wings, "people get so lost they can't find their way back alone. Sometimes they need someone to show them there's still good in this world, even when everything looks dark." That letter had been from her sister's daughter, a girl who'd gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd and was thinking about ending it all. Martha had driven 600 miles that very night to sit with her, to hold her hand and remind her that tomorrow could be different if she just held on. The girl was a nurse now, married with kids, living proof that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to step into the darkness with you. But this wasn't some kitchen conversation or family crisis I could think about for days. This was happening right now, at 64 May Piage on a mountain highway with failing brakes, and a woman who looked like she'd made peace with whatever decision had brought her to this godforsaken spot. The distance between us was closing fast, maybe 300 yards now, and I could see her more clearly than I wanted to. She was beautiful in that broken way that makes your heart ache, like a stained glass window that's been shattered but still catches the light. Her auburn hair was whipping in the wind created by my approaching truck, and she was wearing what looked like a wedding dress underneath that denim jacket. Not a fancy one, but the kind you might buy at a department store for a simple ceremony. The white fabric was dirty and torn, like she'd been walking for miles. That's when it hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just standing there randomly. She was waiting for me, or for someone like me, to come barreling down this mountain with no way to stop. The realization made my blood run cold, but it also crystallized something inside me. This wasn't about my failing brakes anymore. This wasn't about making a delivery or getting home safe. This was about a choice that would define who I was in the final chapter of my life. I made a decision that went against every instinct I'd developed in 42 years of driving. Instead of trying to swerve around her, instead of laying on the horn and hoping she'd jump out of the way, I aimed straight for her and started flashing my headlights. Not to scare her, but to let her know I saw her, really saw her, and I wasn't going to let her face whatever demons had brought her here alone. The next 30 seconds stretched out like an eternity, each heartbeat thundering in my ears, louder than the diesel engine. At 200 yards I could see her face clearly, pale skin marked by tears, lips moving like she was saying a prayer or maybe an apology to someone who wasn't there. At 150 yards I realized what she was holding in her hand, a photograph, creased and worn from being handled too much. At 100 yards, she stepped into the road. But here's the thing about being a trucker for 4 decades. You develop reflexes that go beyond conscious thought. My hands moved before my brain could process what they were doing. I yanked the wheel hard to the right, feeling the trailer start to jackknife behind me, then immediately corrected left to avoid the guardrail that was rushing up to meet us like a steel wall of death. The woman's eyes went wide as she realized what was happening, not the quick end she'd been expecting, but something far more complicated. The physics of what happened next still don't make complete sense to me. 40 tons of truck and trailer, moving at highway speed with failing brakes, somehow managed to thread the needle between the woman and the guardrail. I felt the passenger side mirror clip her jacket, spinning her around but not knocking her down. The trailer swung wide, tires screaming against asphalt, and for a moment I thought we were going over the edge into Walnut Canyon. But the rig held together, momentum and luck, and maybe something else carrying us past the point of no return. I fought the wheel like I was wrestling a bear, using every trick I'd learned from ice storms and crosswinds and emergency maneuvers that had saved my life more times than I could count. The trailer straightened out just as we hit a slight uphill grade that finally started to slow us down. When I finally got the rig stopped about a quarter-mile down the road, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. No diesel rumble, no road noise, just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the tick of cooling metal. I sat there for a full minute, trying to process what had just happened before I remembered the woman. I grabbed my CB radio with trembling fingers. Breaker 19, this is Big Blue eastbound on 66 near mile marker 201. I need immediate assistance. We got a situation here that requires law enforcement and probably an ambulance. Lady in distress, possible 1096. My voice cracked on the last words. In trucker code, 1096 meant mental subject, but it felt inadequate for what I'd just witnessed. The response came back immediately from a local driver who'd been monitoring the channel. Big Blue, this is Desert Rat. I'm about 10 miles behind you. I'll be there in 15. You okay, driver? I'm fine, I lied, because admitting the truth that I was anything but fine would have to wait. Right now, I had to get back to that woman and make sure she was still breathing. The walk back to where she was felt like the longest quarter-mile of my life. My legs were still shaky from the adrenaline, and every step on that cracked asphalt echoed in the desert silence like gunshots. The morning sun was climbing higher now, casting long shadows across the highway and making the heat shimmer rise from the pavement in waves that distorted everything like a mirage. But she was real enough. Sitting on the guardrail now, that torn wedding dress spread around her like broken wings, still clutching that photograph like it was the only thing tethering her to this world. As I got closer, I could see the damage my mirror had done. Her denim jacket was torn at the shoulder, and there was a scrape along her left arm that was bleeding, but not badly. What worried me more was the look in her eyes, not the relief you'd expect from someone who'd just cheated death, but something closer to disappointment, like I'd interrupted something important, something she'd been planning for a long time. "Ma'am?" I called out when I was still about 20 feet away, not wanting to spook her. "You hurt? I called for help. They'll be here soon." My voice sounded strange in the desert air, rougher than usual, like I'd been shouting instead of whispering prayers for the last 10 minutes. She looked up at me then, and I got my first clear look at those eyes that had been haunting me since I'd first spotted her on the highway. They were green, the color of bottle glass worn smooth by the ocean, and they held a depth of pain that made my chest tighten. But there was something else there too, a flicker of curiosity, like she was trying to figure out why I'd risked everything to avoid hitting her instead of just letting fate take its course. "You should have just kept going," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the still air. It would have been easier for everyone. There was no accusation in her tone, just a tired acceptance that made my heart break a little more with each word. I took a few steps closer, moving slow like you would with a wounded animal. "Name's Frank," I said, settling down on the guardrail about 6 feet away from her, close enough to talk, but far enough to give her space. "Frank Morrison. Been driving this route for more years than I care to count, and I can tell you one thing for certain, nothing about what just happened was easy." She studied my face for a long moment, like she was trying to read something written there, in the lines and weathered skin. "I'm Elena," she said finally. "Elena Vasquez. And She stopped, looking down at the photograph in her hands. From where I sat, I could just make out that it showed a young man in military dress blues, smiling at the camera with the kind of confidence that only comes from being 22 and thinking you're invincible. "That your husband?" I asked gently, nodding toward the picture. Her laugh was bitter as desert wind. "Was supposed to be." We were going to get married yesterday, right here in Arizona. Had it all planned out. Small ceremony at the Chapel of the Holy Cross in Sedona. Just family and a few friends. Nothing fancy, but it was going to be perfect. She traced the edge of the photograph with her thumb, a gesture so tender it made my throat tight. Miguel shipped out to Panama 3 months ago, Elena continued, her voice getting stronger, but also more brittle, like ice that's starting to crack. Operation Just Cause, they called it. Said he'd be back in time for the wedding, promised me on his mother's grave that nothing would keep him away. I bought this dress, sent out invitations, even ordered a cake from that little bakery in Flagstaff that makes those tres leches cakes he loved so much. And the wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and creosote across the highway, and I watched her auburn hair dance around her face as she stared down at that photograph like it might come to life if she looked hard enough. The telegram came Tuesday morning. Killed in action, it said. Just 3 words to sum up everything we were going to be together. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, a familiar weight that I'd carried for 3 years now since Martha passed. The weight of being left behind, of having to figure out how to keep breathing when the person who made breathing worthwhile was gone. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it more than any words I'd ever spoken. The worst part, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, is that I was angry at him. When I got that telegram, my first thought wasn't grief or sadness, it was rage. Pure white-hot fury that he'd broken his promise, that he'd left me standing at the altar in a wedding dress with nowhere to go and no one to marry. How sick is that? The man I loved died serving his country, and I was mad at him for ruining our wedding. She looked up at me then, and I could see the self-loathing burning in those green eyes like acid. I'd been walking this highway for 2 days, wearing this stupid dress, trying to work up the courage to join him. Figured if I couldn't have our wedding, at least I could have our ending. But then you came along with your truck and your flashing lights, and you looked at me like I mattered, like my life was worth saving, even when I didn't think it was. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the desert silence, growing louder with each second. Help was coming, but I realized that what Elena needed couldn't be delivered by paramedics or police officers. What she needed was something I wasn't sure I had left to give. Hope. The kind of hope that could bridge the gap between wanting to die and finding a reason to live. Eleanor, I said, my voice rough with emotion I hadn't expected to feel. I lost my wife 3 years ago. Cancer. And I spent every day since then wondering why I was still here when she wasn't, why I had to keep waking up in a world that didn't have Martha in it anymore. I paused, watching her face, seeing recognition flicker in her eyes. But sitting here with you right now, I think I'm starting to understand. Maybe we're not supposed to figure out why we're still here. Maybe we're just supposed to be here for each other. The sirens were getting closer now, maybe 5 minutes out, but something had shifted in the space between Elena and me. She was looking at me with different eyes. Not the hollow stare of someone who'd given up, but the cautious curiosity of someone who'd just heard something that made her want to listen a little longer. The photograph of Miguel was still in her hands, but she wasn't gripping it like a lifeline anymore. Instead, she was holding it gently, like a memory she wanted to keep safe, rather than a weight she needed to carry. "Tell me about Martha," she said quietly, and the way she said my wife's name, with respect, with genuine interest, made something loosen in my chest that had been tight for 3 years. So I told her. I told her about how Martha and I met at a truck stop in Amarillo in 1951, how she was working the night shift at the diner and I was a rookie driver who couldn't figure out how to back my trailer into the loading dock without making a fool of myself. How she came out with a cup of coffee and a piece of apple pie, and guided me through it with hand signals and patience I didn't deserve. How we got married 6 months later, in a little chapel not 20 miles from where we were sitting now, and how she rode shotgun with me for the next 38 years, turning the cab of our truck into a home that moved at 70 miles per hour across the American landscape. "She sounds wonderful," Elena said, And there was no jealousy in her voice, no bitterness about the decades Martha and I had together that she and Miguel would never have. Just genuine warmth for a love story that had run its course. "She was," I said, surprised to find myself smiling instead of crying when I talked about her. "But you know what she'd say if she was here right now? She'd say that love doesn't end just because someone dies. It changes, it transforms, but it doesn't disappear. Miguel's love for you didn't die in Panama, Elena. It's right here, in that photograph, in the wedding dress you're wearing, in the fact that you cared enough about him to want to follow him wherever he went." Elena looked down at the photograph again, but this time I saw something different in her expression. Not the desperate clinging of someone trying to hold on to something that was slipping away, but the gentle reverence of someone saying goodbye to one chapter so they could begin another. "I don't know how to live without him," she whispered. And the honesty in those words hit me like a physical blow, because I'd said the exact same thing to myself every morning for the past 3 years. "Neither did I admitted. "Still don't, most days. But I'm learning that maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point isn't to figure out how to live without them. Maybe it's to figure out how to live with their love still inside us, how to carry it forward and share it with people who need it." The first police car crested the hill, followed by an ambulance, their lights painting the desert in alternating red and blue. But Elena didn't seem to notice. She was staring at me with an intensity that made me feel like she was seeing something in my face that I didn't even know was there. "You saved my life," she said simply. "No," I replied, and I meant it. "You saved mine." The next few hours passed in a blur of questions and paperwork and concerned officials who wanted to make sure Elena wasn't a danger to herself or others. I stayed with her through all of it, partly because the police needed my statement about what had happened, but mostly because something had formed between us in those moments on the guardrail. Not romance, nothing like that, but something deeper and more necessary. A recognition that we were both survivors of losses that had nearly destroyed us, and that maybe, just maybe, we could help each other find a way forward. The paramedics checked her over and declared her physically fine, except for the scrape on her arm from my mirror. The police officer, a young guy named Rodriguez, who couldn't have been much older than Miguel, was gentle but thorough in his questioning. When he asked Elena if she had somewhere to go, somewhere safe, she looked at me with those green eyes that had already seen too much. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I gave up my apartment in Tucson when Miguel and I were going to move to base housing. All my stuff is in storage, and I don't have anywhere to be right now." That's when I heard Martha's voice again, clear as if she was standing right there beside the police car. "Frank Morrison, don't you dare let that girl walk away alone. She needs family right now, and so do you." "Elena," I said, the words coming out before I could second-guess myself, "I've got a house in Tucson. Big old place that's been way too quiet since Martha passed. Got a guest room that hasn't seen company in years, and I could use someone to help me figure out what to do with all of Martha's things. If you need a place to land while you get your bearings, you're welcome to stay as long as you need." Officer Rodriguez looked between us with the kind of skepticism that comes from seeing too many bad situations disguised as good intentions. "Ma'am, you don't have to go anywhere with anyone. We can arrange for social services or contact family members." "I don't have family," Elena said quietly. "Miguel was my family. And Frank." She looked at me with something that might have been the beginning of trust. "Frank risked his life to save mine when he didn't even know my name. I think that makes him family too." The paperwork took another hour, but eventually we were free to go. My truck had been towed to a garage in Flagstaff for brake repairs, so Officer Rodriguez gave us a ride into town. Elena sat in the back seat, still wearing that torn wedding dress, but she'd folded Miguel's photograph carefully and put it in the pocket of her denim jacket, not hiding it, but keeping it close in a way that felt like acceptance rather than desperation. "What happens now?" she asked as we pulled into the garage parking lot. I looked at this young woman who'd stumbled into my life at exactly the moment when we both needed saving, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years, hope for tomorrow. "Now we figure it out together," I said. 1 mile at a time. The mechanic at Flagstaff Truck Repair was a grizzled old-timer named Pete who'd been fixing rigs since before I started driving. He took one look at my brake system and let out a low whistle that told me everything I needed to know. "Frank, you're one lucky son of a gun," he said, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. "These brake lines didn't just fail, they were ready to give out completely. Another mile or two and you wouldn't have had any stopping power at all." Eleanor and I stood there in the garage bay, watching Pete point out the hairline cracks in the brake lines, the worn pads, the hydraulic fluid that had been leaking slowly for who knows how long. It should have been terrifying to realize how close I'd come to a catastrophic failure, but instead I felt something else entirely. Gratitude. Gratitude that the brakes had held on just long enough, that I'd been in exactly the right place at exactly the right time to find Elena, that sometimes the universe conspires to put broken people together so they can help each other heal. "It's going to take 2 days to get the parts," Pete continued, "but I can have you back on the road by Thursday morning. You got somewhere to stay." I looked at Elena, who was studying the brake components with the intensity of someone trying to understand the mechanics of fate. "Yeah," I said, "we'll figure something out." We ended up at a little motel called the Desert Rose, nothing fancy but clean and quiet, with 2 adjoining rooms and a view of the San Francisco peaks in the distance. Elena had called her storage facility in Tucson and arranged to have some clothes shipped overnight. But for now, she was still wearing that wedding dress, though she'd borrowed one of my flannel shirts to cover the torn shoulder. That evening, we sat on the motel balcony watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. And Elena told me more about Miguel, how they'd met in college, how he'd proposed on the rim of the Grand Canyon, how he'd wanted to be a teacher after his military service was over. I told her more about Martha, her laugh that could fill a room, her terrible cooking that I pretended to love, the way she'd hum old country songs while she organized our logbooks. "I keep thinking I should feel guilty," Elena said, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Here I am, talking and laughing and feeling almost normal, and Miguel's been gone less than a week. Shouldn't I be more broken than this?" "Martha used to say that grief isn't a contest," I replied, remembering one of the many conversations we'd had about loss over the years. "It's not about how broken you are or how long you stay that way. It's about learning to carry love forward instead of letting it bury you." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, then reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out Miguel's photograph. But this time, instead of staring at it with desperate longing, she propped it up against the motel room window where it could catch the last light of day. "I think he would have liked you," she said simply. "I think Martha would have liked you too," I said, and meant it. She always said the best way to honor someone's memory is to keep their love alive by sharing it with others. 2 days later, Pete had my rig running better than it had in months. New brake lines, fresh fluid, pads that would stop me on a dime, the works. Elena had gotten her clothes from storage and traded the wedding dress for jeans and a simple blue blouse, but she'd kept Miguel's photograph, now safely tucked in a small frame she'd bought at a gift shop downtown. We were loading our bags into the cab when Elena stopped and looked back at the stretch of highway where everything had changed. "Frank," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Shoot." "When you saw me standing there, when you realized what I was planning to do, why didn't you just swerve around me and keep going? It would have been easier, safer. You could have called it in on your radio and let someone else deal with it." I thought about that question for a long moment, watching a red-tailed hawk circle high above the desert, riding the thermals with an ease that made flight look effortless. "You know," I said finally, "I've been asking myself the same thing, and I think the answer is that I recognize something in you that I'd been carrying around for 3 years. That feeling of being lost, of not knowing how to keep going when the person who made everything make sense was gone." Elena nodded slowly, understanding flickering in those green eyes. "And?" And I realized that maybe the reason I'm still here, the reason I survived when Martha didn't, isn't so I could figure out how to live without her. Maybe it's so I could help other people figure out how to live with loss, how to carry love forward instead of letting it destroy them. We climbed into the cab, and I fired up the diesel, feeling the familiar rumble of the engine beneath us. Elena settled into the passenger seat that had been Martha's for so many years, but it didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like continuation, like the next chapter in a story that wasn't ending, but transforming. "So what happens now?" Elena asked as we pulled out of the garage and onto Route 66, heading east toward Tucson and whatever came next. "Now we deliver this load," I said, patting the steering wheel of the rig that had carried us both through the most important journey of our lives. "And then we figure out what comes after that, together." As we rolled down that legendary highway, past the same guardrail where Elena had been ready to end her story, and I'd found a reason to continue mine, I thought about all the miles I'd driven over the years, all the loads I'd delivered, all the sunrises and sunsets I'd witnessed from behind the wheel of a truck. But none of those miles had been as important as the quarter-mile walk back to a broken woman in a wedding dress who'd taught me that sometimes the best way to save someone else is to let them save you right back. The CB radio crackled to life with the familiar chatter of drivers sharing road conditions and weather reports, and I reached for the microphone. "Breaker 19, this is Big Blue eastbound on 66. Just wanted to let everyone know the road ahead is clear and beautiful. Keep the shiny side up and the greasy side down, drivers. It's a good day to be alive." Elena smiled at that, the first real smile I'd seen from her, and I knew that Martha was right. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It just finds new ways to keep traveling down the road.